What are the best management practices? They're one unified document that showcases the strategies and practices of successful oyster farming. What do they include? Guidelines and resources. And where do they come from? They're all driven by growers. So what these are all here to say is that the best management practices are here to help people do what's best for their individual farms and also what's best for the sector as a whole. They really highlight the best practices of the most successful farms and show people how they can apply those to their farms to not make mistakes that, again, people have already learned. They can focus on current issues, as often is the case, but it also gives a chance to look ahead. And that was part of what was really interesting working with growers in this, was to look ahead and see what future concerns or potential issues could be. And what can we do about them now? And what can farmers do about them now to help prevent them or mitigate them in the future? A big part of that too is helping you prepare on how to avoid pitfalls. That's those mistakes as I mentioned as well. But the big thing here is this one unified document. There's a lot of information consolidated into one place that's relatively easy to follow. And even as you're going through it, a lot of resources are linked within this. I can tell you there's a lot of work and a lot of links and whatnot from many different sources that are all pulled together to create this. I'm sure Jack could probably tell you, as I have to give Jack full credit too in working on the layout for these BMPs. So thank you and kudos to Jack on that. There's a lot of work from many sources, and he could probably tell you how many links he had to verify in here just to make sure it was accurate. So why do we want to use BMPs for aquaculture? Well, a big part of it is to establish a voluntary code of conduct too. And I want to pause there for a second to highlight this is all a voluntary code of conduct. There's nothing here that is mandatory. And in fact, we were very careful in crafting these and had a lot of feedback, both internally and with growers, to make sure that nothing we were saying could be overly prescriptive in a way that would make it too difficult to do something. Another way of saying it is we don't want anything here that could be used against us in the sense that we don't want it to be too restrictive. So voluntary is a big part of that. So what are we establishing a voluntary code of conduct for? Why? To help improve public perception. The more people know about aquaculture, the more positively they tend to view it. And of course, the better we conduct ourselves and the better everyone sees us, the better we look in everyone's eyes. Another big aspect of this, which is often related to the public perception, is also to minimize conflict and wait times. So a big part of these two first parts are really things like farm siting or being a good neighbor. So the less time it takes for each application to be processed and to be reviewed, the less time it takes from DMR, that means the more time that's available in their finite amount of time they have to look at your application, to make sure your application go quicker. So this is another one of those instances where the quicker and better things go for an individual farmer, the better it will benefit the whole sector. And as I mentioned, again, just the more people know about aquaculture, the more supportive they generally are. Another big part of the BMPs is a bit more, I'd say, on the economics production side, maximizing efficiency, profit, and quality. So the first two are looking more at public perception and the regulatory aspects. And this last part's looking, again, more at that bottom line. So how can you maximize what you already have within your current footprint, or how can you improve beyond your current footprint as you move forward with other leases and whatnot? What is the most efficient for where your farm is, for how you like to operate, for the oysters you like to grow? Big part of this is making sure people are keeping quality high. And by that, there's some more specific information within the BMPs, which you can see for yourself, looking at specific quality markers, things to keep in mind to really strive for. A big part of this all is, improving farms on a farm level, which then still carries forward that really high premium to the name of Maine, to the name of Maine seafood and Maine oysters. Make sure it's staying at a really high quality level. It helps build that reputation with everyone from consumers to fishmongers, investors, policymakers, everyone. As we're operating well in a way that looks good in the public eye and is good in the public eye, that is going to be the best we can look for everyone. And that reputation is crucial, especially again for being a slow growing, high value product we have in oysters, even compared across the country. Last part of this is Why this logo? Why the best aquaculture practices? That's because BMPs are often used as a precursor for certification. And in fact, these standards for BAP shellfish production were consulted pretty extensively in making these BMPs. So is that to say we are going down this route? No. Are we curious to learn more about maybe a voluntary verification system? Yes, and I'll touch on that later. So how do we make these BMPs? For anyone familiar with our occupational standards, which are driving the apprenticeship program, this is the same process we used in that, and it worked out really well. So it started with literature review and grower interviews. So the literature review, as I mentioned, was across the world, from agriculture to aquaculture to a lot of different sectors. I learned a lot more about wastewater treatment systems, best management practices than I ever thought I would. So you never quite know what you're going to find in learning more about a topic like BMPs. So that again spanned the whole world, and there were a lot of grower interviews in the early stages to learn what people saw as their successes, their challenges, their concerns, so on and so forth. So we used all that, and that's that first square, to create a draft. Once we had that draft, then we discussed with growers. And with those growers, it was in-person meetings, it was Zoom calls, it was phone calls, it was online group meetings, it was in-person group meetings, email feedback for those who couldn't make those. There was a lot of different mediums being used to make sure we get feedback from as many people as possible. And for 30 plus oyster farmers in Maine, that's a pretty good sample size. So then it came to the revising, rediscussing, and going over edits again and again and again to make sure everything was in line with what everyone wanted. Finalize the document, and then the most important part in the crux here, which is really the rollout and the sector buy-in. We went through this really iterative process. As you see, there's two distinct stages where there are growers involved in this creation, but really it was throughout the entire process. I was talking with growers the entire time we were developing these. And that's why I have here the crux is the rollout and the sector buy-in. As I said in the very first slide of this, these are by oyster farmers for oyster farmers. I may have put them on paper, but all I really was doing was pulling from the literature I had and all the conversations I had with people to put forth the best practices that everyone wanted to see be carried out in Maine. And so the sector buy-in is crucial to us. And that's why it's really important that we made sure that these were driven by growers, that growers understood that their voices were the ones represented here. Their voices were the ones for others to listen to. And frankly, without the voices of the growers in here, without sector buy-in, this would be close to worthless probably. So it's really crucial for us that the whole creation process was really iterative and working with growers and continuing to do so as we move through this rollout process. And support for this was all provided by Focus Maine as well. Feedback initially was the BMPs. They're helpful for all farmers and especially new farmers. There's a lot of information in here that they wouldn't be able to get elsewhere from a very salty oyster farmer. This was from someone I definitely did not expect to hear this from, and that was great news because this told me someone who was, I thought, maybe not going to be super supportive of the work was supportive. This was before we even released it when I was working on a draft with them. But what I really want to highlight here is especially new farmers. So, as I mentioned, it's nothing against new farmers, just new farmers are new. When you're new at anything, you're learning. You're going to make mistakes. And those mistakes can affect you, but they can affect other people as well. So this was from a really seasoned oyster farmer, and to hear them say that they're not only helpful for all farmers, but especially new farmers, told us that this really is going in the right direction that we wanted. So what is within them? The BMPs have 5 sections. The first looks at farm siting practices. Second looks at drafting a strong lease proposal. Third looks at production. Fourth looks at record keeping. And the fifth looks at risk management. Why this order? This is essentially the order that we tend to see when people are starting a farm. So, of course, these are all parts of, say, when someone's looking at getting a new lease or something like that. But really, what we had in mind was gearing these towards a new farmer. Will seasoned farmers benefit from them? According to that last slide, yes, everyone will. But the design really was to focus on earlier stage farmers. There's also an additional supplemental section in here from the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center and Emily Whitmore on social license. It's really good. I highly recommend anyone and everyone look at it. It's really important work that is detailed throughout this as well. So to touch on these briefly, and I'm not going to drag you through the entire set of BMPs right now, but to give you an overview of what is within them, as I mentioned, we start with farm siting practices. So what are we considering in those? Ecological considerations like temperature, depth, salinity, turbidity, much more. And within each of these things, as I mentioned, there's a lot of resources. So I only mentioned three things here, temperature, depth, and salinity. But there are many more factors that are listed out, oftentimes with specific parameters that are recommended. There are resources. For example, for this one, I know it refers to doctors Damien Brady and Tom Kiffney and some of the tools and resources that they have developed. And you can click on it right there and it'll bring you to their website, or probably much to their chagrin, I think will sometimes bring you up right to draft an email to them. But in any case, there's a lot of information right within there. This is sort of a one-stop shop when you're looking at how to improve and or build and or expand your farm. What are the other aspects in here? Social and regulatory considerations like who's nearby? Is there any fishing? Do people like to take their sailboats through that area? Are you looking at the appropriate lease type? Well, it depends. What are your farm goals? What's your anticipated farm size? What's the community in which you're located? And so on. So some of this may seem really obvious, and some of it probably is. And some of you on here are really experienced. Some of you probably are not super experienced. But the big thing is that these can change everything for someone who's new. There are so many things that I could tell you, even I learned, and other farmers were saying they learned as we were going through the process of building these. It may seem obvious, but it can change everything for someone new. Or it can remind someone who's seasoned. Regulations change a lot, laws change, rules change, and sometimes just dynamics change, whether it's the water or the social aspect. There's a lot to be learned for all farmers here, but again, these obvious things, the things that seem probably too obvious, are really geared towards helping newer farmers. Next section looks at drafting a strong lease proposal. So we've heard a lot about this in recent years, and making sure people are doing all that they can, again, to improve their chances individually of getting a lease, but also minimizing their wait time. And again, this goes on the argument of the less time that each lease application takes means that there's more time for other lease applications given the finite amount of hours that DMR has. So what does this look at? Things like social due diligence. So have you spoken with residents, the stakeholders, the town select board? And again, this is all has an additional supplement from MAIC and Emily Whitmore on social license. It's really good. I highly recommend looking into it. It also encourages people to think about your audience. Again, similar to the previous slide, who's nearby? Is it fishing? When you're going to say a hearing, are you talking to landowners of large homes? Are you talking to clammers? Are you talking to other oyster farmers? Are you talking to lobstermen? Who are you going to be talking to? Think about that and think about how, if you were in their shoes, you'd want someone to communicate with you. Of course, another obvious thing, verify your documents, page numbers, gear drawings, coordinates, and more. And with things like gear drawings and coordinates, I've had a lot of people reach out to me individually asking for advice on that, where to go, resources, so on and so forth. And that's another thing where just want to highlight like that has resources within these BMPs. So you can go right to the BMPs and it gives you people to contact, it gives you websites to go to in order to work on things like that, amongst many things beyond gear drawings as well. Production. So what is focused on in production within these BMPs? Food safety, sanitation, and public health. So some of that gets into the regulation, the regulatory aspect, of course. Being a good neighbor, this taps into social license. Things like, as I mentioned, a big part of these BMPs is to improve the public perception. So be a good neighbor, keep a clean farm site, keep noise levels at reasonable times and reasonable levels. A lot more there. And then it gets to the other part, looking at things like improving efficiency and quality. So how do you improve the efficiency of your farm's operation? That'll help you keep costs down. That might help you, who knows, turn a profit one year, or maybe you wouldn't. And importantly, what are those quality markers? What, excuse me, what will help you hit those quality markers in terms of best production methods and practices based on where you're located? And that again is all detailed in this document as well. Excuse me. And last ones on here, we have harvesting and biosecurity. So again, looking at some of the regulatory aspects, but also the production side of what's the best way to harvest, and then protecting yourself and others. Biosecurity. What are you doing? What should you be doing? Worker well-being is also a newer part of this, and I have to say that this was an extremely interesting portion to me because a lot of this was I was letting growers tell me what their concerns were, and it wasn't me asking questions. And the reason I say that is nearly every farmer I talked to brought up worker well-being as something that they really want to focus on improving. Worker well-being, worker safety, whatever you want to call it, they really want to focus on improving it. And this is some work that we just learned we'll be launching more into in the coming months. So if you have any questions or further insights or feedback on that, please feel free to reach out to me after this. I find it, after having worked on farms myself and seen and done many things that I look back on, definitely I think is a very important issue to be further explored. And in fact, we will be creating BMPs more specific to worker well-being and safety down the road as well. So again, please feel free to reach out for now on that, and happy to continue working with you on that. So almost last on here, we have record keeping, which is, usually everyone's favorite part of oyster farming and why they wanted to get into aquaculture to begin with. So record keeping is looking in this context, things like general record keeping. Are you keeping records? Is it receipts in a shoebox? Maybe here's some other ideas you could consider. Again, this gets to the regulatory aspect as well with food safety and traceability, different ways of tagging, so on and so forth, business and tax. What should you look at? What do you need to look at? Farm management, things like harvest and growth data, repairs, etc. And as you see, some of this is overlap with what I've already said. Farm management probably is going to tie in with your farm efficiency as well. Um, and even same thing with efficiency or say time to market, things like environmental data. And in other good news related to this as well, on the record keeping and regulatory side, we are also working on a regulatory compliance guide right now that's in draft format. So that should be coming out probably March to April, and we'll be hosting a webinar on that as well, along with working with growers one-on-one. So again, feel free to reach out about that too. And yeah, that's work in progress right now and has brought a lot of this information, even from within the BMPs, into a more concise document. So what's the last part of the BMPs? Risk management. So one of my favorite infographics. Looks at things like risk tolerance. Essentially, what is it that you're willing to accept for risk on your farm? Are you kind of a high risk reward person or are you lower risk, more moderate reward? It's fine either way. Just there are things to consider and something that people often don't really think about until sometimes it is frankly too late. 5 types of risks, it goes over them in much greater detail. Also talks about things like insurance and assistance. So things like the pilot crop insurance program or the NAP program, which for any of you who are newer growers, which is under 10 years, NAP should cover you at the catastrophic level for free. So feel free to reach out to me or your farm service agency or FSA office. That's something I would highly recommend signing up for. And also keeping in mind other things like ELAP, which there's also information on our website as well and within the BMP. So I highly recommend looking into those. So enough about the BMPs and what's in them. What are we here to do and what's next? We're widely sharing them. So as I mentioned, we sort of soft launched and quietly put them on our website. And this is the first time we really publicly come out and talked about them in detail. So this is our first stop. Next, want to meet one-on-one with growers to foster adoption. So please feel free to scan the QR code and sign up for a meeting with me. I'm happy to meet one-on-one with you to go through the BMPs and your farm and to find areas where maybe you're doing really well, maybe areas where you could benefit from some improvement. Maybe it's just I'm answering questions, trying to help answer some questions for you about specific things in the BMPs and how they apply to your farm. In any case, I am here to meet with you in order to make these be as applicable on your farm and for you to be able to benefit as much as you can. And the plan is to do this with as many farmers as possible, where again, the more people we can talk to, the better everyone will benefit individually and collectively as a whole. And these are also going to be tied into the business planning work that I do. As I mentioned, I've done a lot of one-on-one business planning, which has now grown to include succession planning, is now including BMPs as well. So I've met with over 100 people at this point, and the number is still growing. So the plan is to incorporate these with people as soon as I start meeting with them, which oftentimes is before they've even put anything in the water. Another part of this is, as I briefly mentioned earlier, gauge interest in a verification system. So This is again something that's not mandatory. It's something that would be voluntary. Really reasonable, approachable steps that would see if people want to find a way to use these as some sort of a label. So is it a BAP stamp or something like that? No. But do people have any interest in saying that, who knows, whether it's on their website or on a stamp or something like that, that I follow the Maine aquaculture oyster BMPs or something like that? Or is it something that people want to do more internally and keep it more on the down low? We're happy to do whatever people want to do, and the sector really wants us to go for a direction. But regardless, we're here to support that process, whatever it may look like, because who knows, maybe most interested in verification, whether it's growers or buyers like wholesalers, or is it consumers? Where might that be best seen, if at all? So that's something that really I'm here to learn more from you all about. And as I mentioned earlier as well, sometimes it's a potential precursor to certification. To be completely honest, I'm not 100% sure that BAP or something like that would be a great fit based on the current size of oyster farms, but it also could be depending on the farms. So that's something I'm glad to discuss with you, or I've gone through the auditing classes as well, so I'm happy to share everything I've learned from those courses through BAP to see if that's something that makes sense for an individual farm or perhaps a group or something like that. So with that, I'll wrap up everything here. Um, the BMPs are at the QR code on your left, and you can book a meeting with me on the right. Um, and yeah, so the BMPs, just to recap everything again, these BMPs were requested by growers and driven by growers in order to improve both individual farms and the sector as a whole by learning from each other. This again is really me capturing what everyone wants everyone else to learn from them and really focus on putting forth everyone's best foot in aquaculture, specifically oyster aquaculture, in all aspects from, again, the lease siting to the production to being a good neighbor to even the record keeping and compliance. So, with that, I know we still have a fair amount of time, as I mentioned, to take questions. So, I am happy to do that. I have some other polls in here for later on too, but for right now, I'm happy to pause and take questions from anyone. And feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you have a question you'd prefer to put in the chat, please feel free to do that as well. Either way works.
Christian, I'll ask a question. Sebastian
Yeah.
here. What in your mind was the biggest challenge to bringing these BMPs forward? Obviously, this is something that the association has done with a number of other species groups, but this was the most recent effort we've done. And what do you think was the biggest challenge to getting them, down on paper and getting grower buy-in?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts about this was just that. It was getting it down on paper. There was a lot of knowledge, experiences, resources, so on and so forth that were not really on paper. And that's why these interviews and conversations were so important. A lot of this was taking information from many different people on many, many different topics and pulling down, sometimes an hour of conversation into four bullet points. So that was probably the most challenging part, was finding all that information from different people, finding what within that was the most consistent across all experiences, knowledge, and so on, and finding a concise way to get that in here. As you can see, they're not the most brief documents in the world it's not the most brief document in the world by any means, but it's a very much a concise version compared to what we learned both on paper, but especially from all those meetings that we had and interviews talking with people.
And in your mind, what's the next stage in this project in terms of getting grower buy-in? How does that work?
Yeah, I think the next big part in grower buying is really working one-on-one with people, to make sure that everyone's understanding how this can work on their farm individually. And I think this is something I saw, for example, with business planning, where I started doing that 6 years ago at this point, and it was pretty slow to start. But as I started working with people, others heard about it, whether through word of mouth or through advertisement or through my emails. But in any case, once people started picking it up, it gained some momentum and snowballed pretty quickly. And before I knew it, there were a lot more people enrolling in that than I frankly had ever expected. So that's really the plan and the hope for this is to continue with this more public facing aspect of it. So I know Jack, for example, will work with him on some more social media release and whatnot to get it out to a large number of people, but also working individually with growers and working individually people through giving them phone calls, sending out emails to set up these individual discussions to make sure it people are aware of what's happening and to see how they can benefit from them and employ them on their own farms.
Thanks, Christian. The only last thing I would say is I think for anybody who's on the seminar, who's not from the grower community, but might be from the environmental community or from a policy entity, we'd love your feedback as well. We really welcome it, and I know that that's important from the grower perspective. We'll spin that around and put that right back to the growers and see how they can integrate it into the next kind of evolution of the BMPs.
Yeah, and for anyone interested further too, there's great work from the East Coast Shellfish Growers Association on their BMPs as well. These ones are specific to Maine and go into some different areas that they don't in there, but if you're really wanting to look into it too, whether it's you're a grower from the environmental community, I definitely recommend checking those out too. Does anyone have any questions in the meantime? All right, I see one in the chat. Rusty, has a topic of forming a co-op come up? Um, yes, it has, Rusty. There are, I believe, someone could correct me. I think two or three co-ops in the state right now around oyster farming. Three. All right, thank you, Sebastian. There are three in the state. I believe I do touch on it briefly within this work about the option of working with a co-op or creating a co-op. There is also additional information within our financing resources manual, which is on our website as well, that really goes into more detail on all the business structures. So for anyone who's more interested in that, that really gives you a bit more of a financial and legal regulatory breakdown of how you can really assess all those options and what works best for you in terms of co-op. As a part of this work, though, Rusty, it didn't come up a ton. It was mentioned, but not a ton, I would say.
Just on the agritourism thing,
Yeah.
Christian, we have done in the past workshops with members around the specific issue of insurance, and if you're giving farm tours and whatever, we've done that in cooperation with Sea Grant, and if people are interested in that issue, reach directly out to us, and we'll definitely get you more information. It is a legitimate issue that you've got to make sure that you are doing the right thing on, because if you don't do the right thing from a liability point of view, your exposure could be quite high.
Yeah, and thanks for the questions in the chat too. Anyone's welcome to put them in the chat, or again, feel free to unmute yourself as well. While people are looking to come up with any questions they may have, I will also add this secondary poll looking at how would you describe your interest in a voluntary BNP verification system? So if you're still on here and able to, please feel free to just click this. This is just trying to gauge interest in, again, this is that aspect of, again, a verification system. So if you want to say my farm adheres to Maine aquaculture oyster BMPs, whether you're interested or not, please feel free to add to that. And that's just really good feedback for us in how we shape, as Sebastian was asking, the future of this work as well and what directions we want to take it in. I thought I might have seen somebody come on video and unmute themselves. Apologies if so. Please feel free to ask a question if you had it.
Can I just add one thing on the verification thing, Christian? One of
Yeah.
the things that we're seeing is, markets are changing, and particularly larger buyers are starting to increasingly ask for third-party verification on BMPs. The reason they're doing that is because they believe it gives them some insurance around criticism for their business practices. So if you see the big seafood certification programs, they are essentially becoming insurance programs for the buyers. So, if you are a farmer and your farm is growing, If you're beginning to deal with larger buyers, I think you have to expect that those larger buyers are going to start to ask for third-party verification and BMPs. And so if you're a small grower and you're selling locally, that's probably not the case, but we're definitely seeing a trend from our perspective where the larger buyers are starting to kind of force their providers to go into those programs because for them, it's a way of ensuring that they're maybe not going to show up on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for adding that, Sebastian. I'm also putting a link in the chat if anyone wants to sign up for a one-on-one meeting to discuss the BMPs further. Again, a specific relation to your farm. And let's see, Rusty, I think this would be useful regionally as well. I'm glad to hear that, Rusty. Yeah, we've been talking about growers here, but um, again, like those occupational standards we created, I know that people across the country have been replicating them, and even at the national level, they're looking at it too. So, happy to help however I can and share the process we went through to get here. It's still very early stages, and by all means, we still have a lot of work ahead of us to make sure they actually get out there and they're not just sitting on our website. Although Jack did point out that it's, I think, one of the higher visited pages on our website right now. And again, they've only been out there sort of in disguise for a few weeks now, so it's off to a good start on that front. But yeah, please feel free to reach out, Rusty. I'm guessing I'll probably see you next week, so happy to discuss it then. We have printed copies of it as well for anyone of interest. And yeah, we'll probably be bringing some of those Fisherman's Forum, I assume. Okay,
We
great.
will, and I would encourage growers to think of those as a resource. If you go into the leasing process and you want to communicate to your local communities, municipal officials, your neighbors um, about best management practices in the sector, view those as a resource for you to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, it's a longer document, and resource is the best way to think of it, really. If you want to think of it like it's an Oyster dictionary or something, you just want to look up one thing at a time, that's totally fine too. Um, there are all those different sections in there, and when you look at it, you'll see it's pretty detailed in a lot of different ways. So I would definitely recommend, whether you have them online or hard copy, if you have a question about something, I would definitely suggest looking there first, because I can tell you, I pulled, and especially Jack Sebastian, I pulled together a lot of different resources, from both the internet and whatnot, and different people to put it on there. So if you have a question, there's a possibility we've already answered it on the BMPs, or at the very least can point you to a specific resource. A big part of this, again, is just pulling everything together into one document. So I definitely recommend looking at them, maybe doing a control F search to look for one specific item in there. Um, or if you want to read the whole thing, by all means, I would of course encourage that too. Andrew, thank you for your feedback. Want to give one more pause here. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. Glad to answer them now, but if you want to, follow up afterwards in an email or anything, I'm happy to try to answer you then as well.
I have to say, Christian, the challenge with this stuff is it's kind of geeky stuff. And so it's easy to get stuck in the weeds, but Christian has done an amazing body of work here, assembling stuff from a lot of different sources. And I would encourage anybody who's a grower to really take a hard look at this. It's a really pretty impressive piece of work.
Well, thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And if anyone has any specific questions too, whether you do want to get in the weeds or avoid getting in the weeds, please feel free to reach out to me as well. Whether it's, you want to go through an extensive meeting or you just have a couple of quick questions, I'm happy to help however I can. But with that, so further questions, I'm happy to give everyone back solid 10 plus minutes of their day and close up this webinar. But thank you everyone for coming here. Really appreciate it. And yeah, hope you all have a great day and take a look at these BMPs and reach out with any questions that you might have.